This is Stephanie Francisco. I'm the Communications Director for Conservation Alabama. We're back with another Conservation Q&A video chat. It's been 10 years now since the Deepwater Horizon oil spill took place in April of 2010 along the Gulf Coast here in Alabama and across the entire region. And if you watched a few weeks ago, we talked to Executive Director of Mobile Baykeeper, Casey Calloway, about the sort of initial response to the oil spill in the early days of 2010. And now we're looking at the long-term response and exactly what the state of Alabama is doing and how they're managing that process a decade later. And so we're joined today by Amy Hunter. Amy is the Deepwater Horizon Restoration Coordinator. Did I get the title right, Amy? That's a long one. I struggle.
You did, Stephanie. Thank you for saying it so that I don't have to. I appreciate that, but the title's correct, yes.
Excellent. And so, Amy, your job is actually, you're part of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And you are the very first person to have this job.
I am. That is the best part and the hardest part about this job. You talked with Chris Blankenship, the commissioner of the department, a few weeks ago, I believe, and he created this section in I believe it was 2018. The number of oil spill projects and the just number of tasks that the department oversees has grown as more and more oil spill restoration has come online. So the department, my section in particular, serves as kind of the go-between between the federal agencies that oversee the money and the local towns and counties and other stakeholders that put the project on the ground.
So out of curiosity, how did you get to have a job like that? It seems like an interesting mix of government and management, and then also the hard science of all the projects that you've got to evaluate and keep going. So what was your background like before you did this?
Sure. So before I did this, I am a marsh ecologist by training. So I did my graduate work at Dolphin Island at the Sea Lab. So I was doing contracting, consulting work before that was a lot of regulatory type stuff, wetland delineations, things like that. When the oil spill happened, I began work for the state, for conservation, as a contractor and doing just one, the oil spill is divided up into different streams of funding, and so I was doing just one of the pieces of funding, and was fortunate enough and very happy to have gotten hired by the department, by the state, and since then the just like the scope of the projects has grown, the scope of my job has grown, and we've also hired several additional staff members that make all the work of the oil spill section possible, really.
So you mentioned the different streams of funding, and I know from, sort of casually working on oil spill restoration over the last 10 years or so, there's a lot of different agencies at play, and there's a lot of different sources of funding. Can you give us kind of like the overview of the funding streams that are responsible for the projects here in Alabama?
Sure, and it's an alphabet soup of things, and it can be dry and full of government speak. So when we're given public meetings, if I notice people have fallen asleep, I try to wrap it up or do something to spice up the program. Broadly, there are 3 sources of funding related to the environmental settlement. So when we say the environmental settlement, we're not talking about, that doesn't take into account individual claims, doesn't take into account the economic settlement. So this is just the if you will, the natural resources piece that we address. NERDA, NRDA, which is where I got my start, I guess, is a natural resource damage assessment, and those funds result from violations of the Oil Pollution Act and the Oil Pollution Act fines.
And there's essentially like a formula to calculate that, right? That's laid out in the legislation, that there's a formula that gets you a dollar figure.
Now, see, I was trying to keep it high level, and you asked me about a really complicated formula. That formula is associated with bucket 3 of the Restore Act, and we can come on to that in a minute. The NERDA works by what they call offsets. So you generate the natural resource kind of benefit, if you will, of a project, and compare that to the dollar amount. So NERDA can work kind of like a bill in a restaurant, right? You go in, you eat a certain amount, so that's your debit. You get the bill to figure out what it is, and then you settle it up. So NERDA works more like that. The complicated, I guess, accounting and math pieces that are used to arrive at NERDA are called habitat equivalency analyses and resource equivalency analyses, HEAs and REAs. We did a lot more of that before the settlement, and it was when I really learned day in, day out. I still learn this. This job is first and foremost public service. So I work for the people of the state of Alabama, and my job to them is to do what I'm assigned to do to manage the natural resources. But I try to always remember those resources belong to the public, and that's who I'm accountable to, and that's who I work for. But the second thing that I think I learn every day is just how much I learn. I knew a lot about salt marshes, I think, but in doing the NERDA piece that we talked about, I learned lots of economics. I've learned some accounting on different land acquisitions. I've learned a little bit about real estate. And I'm sure there are plenty of economists and lawyers and real estate agents that would tell you that I haven't learned that much, but I learned so much from doing this job every day from so many different people.
Well, so we talked a little bit about Restore Act before, and that's another, that was a big piece of federal legislation that came as a result of the oil spill to make sure that the funds from the settlement came back to the Gulf states. Is that right?
That's right. The Restore Act was passed in 2012, actually before the consent decree or the settlement with BP was in 2016, I believe.
Wow.
And what the Restore Act did was bring 80% of the Clean Water Act fines from the spill, bring that 80% of the money back to the 5 Gulf states. It was really, we owe quite a debt to our congressional delegation that they got that done. If you think about, if you think about 5 in relation to 50, they had to work across a lot of aisles and with a lot of people, and did a tremendous job to bring that money back to us here. Absent the Restore Act, I believe that 80% of any Clean Water Act fines would go into the Oil Pollution Trust Fund, and that could be used anywhere in the United States. But the Restore Act brought the money here for good restoration work here.
Absolutely. And then the third stream of funding that I think we just had some projects awarded not too long ago is NIF West. So can you talk a little bit about NIF West, and maybe if those projects that we just got, it feels like it wasn't that long ago, but time is also sort of nebulous right now. So it might have been like 6 months at this point.
Right.
I don't know.
Sure. Things that happened, it either happened yesterday or 3 years ago. It's a little hard to say. No, Governor Ivey announced in the first part of April 4 additional NIF West projects. The NIF West is foundation, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and they administer the Clean Water Act criminal fines from the settlement through what's called the Gulf Environmental Benefit Fund. We have a total, let's see, I had to write it down, I've got to look. Alabama has about 34 NIF West projects right now in some phase of implementation or planning or monitoring. That totals about $215 million.
Wow.
4 of those, the governor announced at the beginning of April. In those 4 projects, there were 2 land acquisitions. One on Perdido, near where the Blackwater River flows into the Perdido. Ray Herndon and the Conservation Fund were instrumental in helping us get that worked out, and we appreciate their work very much. The second land acquisition is on Halls Mill Creek on Dog River. It's a beautiful place to paddle, and that project has the Dog River Clearwater Revival group has been advocating for that very good acquisition for a long time. So we think we were able to get that one. And then the 2 other projects of those 4, there's one that Mobile County is doing in cooperation with the Mobile Bay National Estuary Program. And that project is a resilience project on the Dauphin Island Causeway. The 4th project is on Fish River. I believe it's an erosion reduction and prevention project in a lot of the tributaries on the Fish River. And that's still in the planning phase a little bit. And again, the NEP is working pretty closely with NIF West on that one. So those were the 4 newest announced projects. 4 really good projects, and we're really appreciate everybody's work. A lot of people that I didn't name just then helped us on those, and we always appreciate that.
For sure. Well, so, we're 10 years in at this point, 10 years down the road from the oil spill itself. Do you have an idea of how long Alabama and the Gulf Coast as a whole is going to be dealing with either restoration as a direct result of the spill or impacts from the spill? What's your sense of the timeline for this looking into the future?
We're going to be doing this a long time. The Restore funding and NERDA funding will receive payments through 2031. So the settlement was for 15 years. NIF West was for 5 years, and we're approaching the end of that 5-year time, but we still have a few more years, good years of NIF West projects to work on. And the Restore, which Restore is the one with the 5 buckets. We didn't talk about that. But Restore and NERDA will be going for a while.
So it sounds like in some shape or fashion, the state of Alabama is going to be in the restoration industry for at least a couple decades as a result of this disaster.
Yes, and the money I think is most transformative if we can use it as a starting place for more restoration, or if we can leverage it to put ourselves in a position to get additional funds. So the hope is, one of the things I would like most is not to just see this 15 years and then go away, but to have created a legacy for other people to have to build on. I think that's particularly true of land acquisition. And the benefits of that, and the making those lands publicly available for people to hike or to paddle or to hunt or to fish or what have you. That's part of our culture and who we are. And so if this works right, this builds on that legacy and helps to, continue it into the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Amy Hunter, Deepwater Horizon Restoration Coordinator, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your service to the state and for taking care of all of our natural resources. We appreciate it very much.
You bet. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Stephanie.